You are listening to the Gritty Podcast, where we talk about all things gritty.
I did try my hand at becoming Derek Zoolander for a few months in New York City.
People stop, it gets their attention, and then they read it. And I'm just like, don't hate the player, hate the game.
I've only been elk hunting for 3 years.
Right.
Why do I think that I would be able to go out there and have his experience and be able to execute? Man, this dude has been successful for decades. Like, he's been doing this a long time.
All right, folks, welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Call, and today my guest is Ryan Munsey. Ryan Munsey turned out to be an incredible guest. I read his book, which is F Your Feelings.
Yeah.
Only he used the F word, like it's actually in the title.
Yep.
And the book is really good. I can't recommend it enough. Another book that I read that kind of reminded me of was Atomic Habits. Mm-hmm. They're both really good books. But Ryan and I discuss his book. We discuss basically human performance. How do you get tougher? How do you have discipline? How do you cultivate discipline? Yeah. How do winners win? Things like that.
It's kind of that Jordan Peterson mentality of stuff, you know, is like, you be a man.
Or David Goggins. You know,
yeah.
Like, yep. It's all mental. Cam Hanes kind of, you know, it's got a, only, you know, Ryan really ties it into, he's a nerd when it comes to biohacking, like human performance, getting the best out of the human body. The whole premise, though, of F Your Feelings is like this thing where if you only do what you feel like doing, it's going to be hard to win in life. Right. And it's deeper than that. Just listen to the podcast. You're going to like it. I couldn't stop talking to Ryan once we got going. Awesome dude. You're going to like this one. Speaking of human performance, you want to get better human performance, go check out the supplements over at Stealthy Nutrition. I really can't recommend it enough. We use the CBD gummies. Mm-hmm. I really like the CBD gummies. The capsules are good, but the gummies.
Sleep spray. Like, I packed that in the backcountry, listening to him snore.
Any of their sleep products are good that help you fall asleep at night. The vitamin K and D, the gut health products, they're all good. You can detox plus. It's all good. It's like Hillary doesn't, you know, Ryan's wife, she's a doctor.
Yeah.
They don't bring something to market unless it's clean and is going to really help your body get what it needs. Yep. And so their products are awesome. Use the code GRITTY over there and you save. And also use the code GRITTY over at Mountain Ops. I admit I like some caffeine. I like a little nice, and I like a little pre-workout drink. Yeah. I like the Ignite, and I like the Yeti. And I'll hit the Blaze shots every now and then as well. Yep. So I like Renew, which has some carbon and psyllium husk and other things which really help with the bowel movements.
Multivitamins every day. And
so check out that stuff over at Mountain Ops. Use the code GRITTY. Mountain Ops also has merino wools, and I wear those merino hoodies and the merino wools on all my hunts. You'll see them in this grizzly bear films that we've been dropping in all my hunts. I don't think I didn't not wear the Mountain Ops merino hoodie all year.
From early season to late season, because they got 3 or 4 different weights, you know, and it's like early season wearing the light. Mm-hmm. Got the hood.
It's a great merino. So
and the workout clothes too. They got the sweats, the shorts.
Yes.
They're comfortable.
So check all that out. Stealthy also has the glassing pads and the rifle covers that you should check out. If you don't have one of those yet, use the code GRITTY. All right, let's get into this show with Munsey. I think you're going to enjoy it. Let us know what you think in the description field. If you want me to have Ryan on again, let me know. You got more questions and follow-ups, let me know, because I really enjoyed this. I think we just sort of scratched the surface, and I think we might do a hunt together sometime in the future. Awesome dude. Check out his book, F Your Feelings. Without further ado, here's Ryan Munsey. Stay gritty. All right, folks, welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I am your host, Brian Call, and today my guest is Ryan Munsey. And Ryan, I came across you, I think, through your book, probably through social media first. And then somehow we connected, and I ended up with your book, which then I read multiple times. It's right up my alley. I think through DMs, you told me I'd probably like the book, and sure enough, I did. It's called F Your Feelings, which is a little intense as far as the title goes, but really, really resonates with me. And so I want to get into your book, but before we do that, I want the elevator pitch on Ryan Munsey, because you're involved in a lot of things, from your motivation from the gym stuff all the way to your book. Yeah, give me a little overview on Ryan Munsey.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we did first get connected on social. I mean, you put out a bunch of great content, so I may have found you through the Gritty films, and of course, I've told you I listened to the podcast, and I think we had you on our podcast, the Better Human Project, Yeah, I think I guess the elevator pitch, I'll try to make it as short as possible, and then give you the general overview. And then if there's any avenue that you want to go down, we can, I'm an open book. Anything's fair game. So I grew up playing sports. I think like you, I played basketball as a kid. And I played sports all the way through high school. I was not good enough to play in college. I did go to Clemson University. So, the bar for athletics where I went to college is pretty high. I wasn't quite that good of an athlete, but my best friend from home, he was on the track team at Clemson, and he was a very accomplished high jumper, won the ACC 7 times, and he was a year behind me. I got to hang out with him and go to a lot of the track practices and kind of learn. That's where I learned human performance, how to train, how to sprint. Like I learned sprint technique and things in the weight room that you don't learn in high school. And at the same time, I was competing as a bodybuilder, got really into, the fitness side of things. I kind of filled that competitive void that was missing by not playing sports with the weight room, and ended up changing my majors. I wanted to do exercise physiology, but Clemson didn't have that. The closest I could get was food science and human nutrition. So I ended up leaving Clemson, graduating Clemson with a degree that is a dietetics degree. If I wanted to become a registered dietitian or an RD, I could have, but I chose not to do that internship because I disagreed with all the nonsense that they were trying to cram down our throats in the nutrition classes that is in total disagreement with what you learn in the science part of the curriculum. I mean, I had to take every single science imaginable. And so you hear biochemistry and, metabolism and all this stuff. And then you go to your nutrition class and you have this, not healthy looking teacher that's trying to tell you all foods fit and there are no bad foods. And, meanwhile, I'm doing my own pursuits outside of the classroom, and I'm learning that, hey, if you change these inputs and these variables with how you train and how you eat, you can change, the way your body looks, the way it performs. So, that was kind of the beginning of my obsession with human performance and human potential. So from there, I've spent a year in New York. I always like to try to skip this part of the bio, but I did try my hand at becoming Derek Zoolander for a few months in New York City. That was not what I imagined that it would be. Yeah. So I got out of there pretty quickly, came back home to Virginia, and got a job as a personal trainer at a big box gym, and just did that for a couple of years. Felt like I could do it better myself. 2012, I opened my own gym. Used to write for a lot of the fitness magazines, some of the websites that a lot of folks may read in the more hardcore strength training and powerlifting side of things. Had some really great mentors, learned a lot. The gym was pretty successful. By no means perfect. A lot of learning lessons there, and sold the gym in 2016. My wife and I got married in 2016. We moved to Virginia Beach, and started a podcast with a company that was in the sort of health and wellness, maybe biohacking space, an e-commerce, CPG type of company. And I ran their podcast, got to do a lot of the internet marketing. And by running that podcast, it was called the Optimal Performance Podcast. I got to work with and talk to a lot of researchers and like white coat type people, academics. And then I was also talking to Olympic athletes and, special forces operators, and sort of was able to marry the theory and then the application of high performance. From my time in the gym, I did that kind of health coaching for, 5 to 7 years, and sort of moved, at least from my own interest, I moved away from the X's and O's and more into being fascinated by why some people were able to succeed and others weren't, because everybody was getting the same X's and O's. So why is one person successful and why is another one not? And that's where this next chapter of being able to talk to, the theory and the application. So here's high performers. What are they doing? How does that match up to, academic world and theory? And that led to a talk that I gave at the Biohacker Summit in Sweden in 2017.
Wow.
And there was another speaker there that said, hey, this was the best talk here. There's more to this. You need to do more. On the flight home, I outlined the book, wrote the book, and that came out in 2018. And from there, I've been able to do a lot of executive coaching, leadership coaching. I was telling somebody the other day, like, I never set out to explore leadership or to become a leader or somebody who teaches and coaches leadership. But I think through my own discipline, and part of when I do talk about leadership, part of that is lead yourself first. And if you can't demonstrate that you can lead yourself first, no one's going to follow you. And I think people noticed that about me, and then it enabled me, or maybe led them to say, hey, will you come in and talk to us? Will you teach us this? And so, with the book, I've been able to do a lot of, I don't want to call it motivational. And I know you stopped yourself before you said that too. But it's, I'm interested in human performance and potential, right? And I want to give people a user's manual for that space between your ears, and, basically roll out a red carpet and say, look, if this is what you want to do with your life, here's how you need to manage the space between your ears, your time, and all the choices and decisions that go from, taking responsibility from where you are to closing that gap of where you want to be. And it's just, and just go ahead.
When I read your book, and then recently I read the book Atomic Habits. I don't know if you've read that yet, but I
haven't.
There's this disconnect, like you said, between like people that are succeeding and people that aren't. And they can get the same instruction, they can get the same gym time, they can get a lot of things similar, and yet not succeed. And, in your book right at the outset, like in Atomic Habits, the author talked about how people really want to be successful. They want to do things, but then they aren't. What is the difference? Why are some people, what do some high performers do, and what do people who aren't winning do? And right near the beginning of your book, you get into the fact that an alarming statistic is how many people don't set goals. And then even the ones that set goals, I think you got it down to 6% that actually are doing it right of the whole population. Like, explain that a little bit, because I think about my own life and I'm like, well, I've been setting goals forever. Like, I just do it almost naturally. And without goals, I feel rudderless. I feel like I get depressed. I get a little, like, I need to be striving toward something to get there and hit that mark, or I'm my worst enemy.
That resonates with me. I mean, I'm the same way also. And I think that's part of what made this exploration so curious to me, because just naturally I'm kind of a goal-driven person. So the statistic you're talking about, I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I think you're right. I think the final number was 6% set and achieve goals. And so I think it was I arrive 20% at the 6 because it's a percentage of a percentage. Yeah, it's 30% set goals and then 20% achieve them. So, 20% of 30% of the population is like 6% of the total population. It's numbers like that. Somebody's going to do that math and be like, you got that wrong. But whatever it is, the final number is 6%. And so, yeah, it's incredibly alarming. And I think it's directly attributable to one of the other statistics that's in the very beginning of the book and is actually one of the kind of root arguments for the title of the book. And, to your point earlier, it is a pretty aggressive title and it's a pretty lowbrow title. I wanted to call the book The Neuroscience of High Performance, but I don't think anybody would have read that. If you're scrolling through Audible or if you're walking through Barnes and Noble, you're gonna be like, oh man, that's way over my head. But if we hit you with F your feelings, you might stop and pick it up and say, oh, well, what is this?
Hey. But it's like, don't hate, don't hate the player, hate the game. I look at that and I think to myself, it's like, it definitely gets your attention. And you even talk about it in the book, I think, like, settling on that title. And the fact is, titles matter. Same with YouTube videos and how you label things, right? And I remember, it's like when someone is doing something on fitness and they post something about, getting enough sleep. Well, that doesn't get you very far. What gets you pretty far is when you actually, it's like when you put a picture of a handsome body on there or a hot girl, people stop and it gets their attention and then they read it. And I'm just like, hey, don't hate the player, hate the game. That's what gets human being. You got to play at the level of human beings are at.
Yeah.
And, I think it's a great title.
Yeah, it's the way that lesson was taught to me was you have to meet people where they are, right? And sometimes you have to speak that language, and that's something especially in the fitness world, to say, like if you look at any magazine cover, tone your tummy or flatten your belly, and as a strength coach, like that, it's like nails on a chalkboard, but that's what sells magazines. That's what makes people stop. And so the other statistic is that 95% of the decisions we make are made based on how we feel in that given moment. And, if you're not goal driven, if you don't have this kind of overarching, like a compass, like a true north that says like, hey, this is where I'm going. It's almost like setting sail from, New York and saying, hey, I'm going to try to get to, I'm going to land at some specific port in Africa. Well, you have to make certain decisions along that route in order to get there. You have to constantly know where you are and which way to turn. And if you're just constantly making choices based on how you feel in that moment, there's no way you're going to end up at that exact destination, on the other side of that journey. And so, that's part of why the people that, obviously, if you don't set a goal to begin with, how could you achieve it? But for those who set goals and then don't achieve them, what the research tells us, and obviously, if you just study human behavior and you look around and if you're objectively auditing either your own decisions and choices or those of the people around you who aren't reaching their goals, you'll see that the choices made on a daily basis aren't aligned with those goals and values. They're aligned with how they feel in that given moment. I don't feel like getting up this morning and doing my workout. I don't feel like packing a meal so that I can eat according to my meal plan. I don't feel like fill in the blank, right? Mm-hmm. And so, again, like that's part of why the title of the book is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, like back to the goal thing, without setting goals, I guess for me, I set the goal and then how I feel is kind of less relevant because I know that the cause that I'm after is more important than what I feel like doing in the moment. What was it like? I think Dave Ramsey says something like, grown-ups grown-ups do what they don't feel like doing because they know they need to do it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, your feelings aren't really relevant in the situation. It's you do it because you know it's the right thing to do. And kids don't. Right. Kids do what they feel like doing. That's part of being a grown-up, you know?
Well, grown-ups are supposed to, or those that don't struggle with, hashtag adulting, right?
Mm-hmm. So tell me this, how does someone change then? Let's say they've set goals and then they sort of just fail. What's the key to unlock that next step in their life, that to achieve a higher performance?
So it's a tricky question because there's not one reason that people fail, right? When I'm working with individuals on a one-on-one basis or even in smaller settings, what I want to do is dig in and find out where that breakdown is occurring, right? So I'll give you a couple of examples, right? So some people may fail because the plan was wrong, right? Maybe they executed the plan to a T and they did everything in their power, but they just had the wrong plan. Right. That's something that happens all the time in fitness. There's a ton of terrible advice out there, right? It could happen in business. There's a ton of bad advice out there. Some of that is attributable to, look, there's any number of reasons that we can start with the wrong plan or a bad plan. But one of the things to really pay attention to is something that my mentor taught this to me as the 3 C's of toxic goals: compete, compare, and copy. And especially in today's world, when we look at others, we get a very distorted view of their reality, right? We only see the reality that they want us to see, right? So there's a really great book, and it's called The Inner Game of Tennis. It was written by Timothy Galway in 1974. And he proposes an equation that says performance is equal to potential minus interference. Performance equals potential minus interference. And so you have to think about, what was interference in 1974? I promise you, whatever answers you come up with pale in comparison to the distractions and interference that are around us in 2022, right? And there's also this cycle of distortion that is part of that book as well. And so I know I'm kind of going off on a big tangent, but I'll bring this back. And so with this cycle of distortion, it goes distorted perception. So meaning I might see someone like you on social media and say, oh, well, Brian, goes on these amazing hunts and he makes money doing it. And, his life must be, perfect and, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to do that. And I'm going to create what he has and that's going to be my life. Right. But I'm not seeing your life in totality, right? I'm not even seeing the totality of what it takes for you to be successful just in that one area of your life that I'm seeing, right? And so I may set out on this plan, right? This action plan. So that's the next layer of distortion, the distorted actions, right? And even if I do all the actions right, I'm going to get different results than you, right? So that's the third layer, distorted results. And then when we get distorted results, what do we then do? We internalize it. What's wrong with me? Right. So Brian's doing this. His life is great. And maybe it is. I'm not saying your life isn't, but for all those people that we see on social media, we don't know that their life is great. We don't know that they're happy. We don't know that we want that. We think we do. Right. And so this is part of these toxic goals: competing, comparing, and copying, distorted perceptions. And so part of the initial work is digging into, what are we really trying to accomplish? Why do you think that you want this thing? Is this something that really you want and that you're willing to do all of the work to accomplish and achieve? And a lot of times right away we find out, hey, that, maybe this isn't the path that you're going to fight tooth and nail to get down, right? Like a lot of people might see you harvest a huge mature bull elk and they're like, oh, that looks cool. I want to be able to put that picture on my Instagram story or, my feed. But then when you see the reality of what it takes to get that thing, you're like, oh, I don't know if this is for me. Right. So that's part of it, right? The setting out with the wrong plan to begin with. And then another common, reason that folks may fail on their goals or fall short is what I was alluding to earlier, where along the way, their choices simply aren't aligned with their goals and their values. And I mean, you kind of alluded to, how you circumvent that, where you say, maybe even before reading the book, you knew like, hey, I have to take my emotions out of this. I have to remove my feelings. I know if I want to accomplish this thing, I've got to do whatever it is that I'm supposed to do when I'm supposed to do it, regardless of how I feel. It's amazing to me how few people in the general public don't think and act that way. I would be willing to bet that a majority of your podcast listeners aren't that way. That's why they gravitate to your content and your podcast, right? And so maybe some of your listeners are like me and you, they're like, I can't fathom that. I can't wrap my head around that. But I promise you, if you're listening to this and you're a person who has struggled to reach your goals in the past or accomplish the things that you set out to do, the bigger the task, the longer it's going to take, the more micro decisions there will be along the way that will determine whether or not you realize that goal. Right? I always like to use the example of being an Olympic athlete, because you don't just say, hey, I'm going to go compete in the next Olympics. Like that's not a 4-year journey, right? The Olympics happen every 4 years. You're probably going to train for that starting at like 8, 10, maybe 12 years old. You're going to compete or train and work towards becoming that athlete for maybe 10 years or more. And then if you're really good, you have 2 or 3 Olympic cycles. So you're looking at, 20, 25, maybe 30 years of your life dedicated to that pursuit. And if you look back at I know people love to follow you and say Lampers. And, I know Lampers has been on this posting spree lately of, on Instagram with all these old bulls that he's killed. And you look at this and it's like, man, this dude has been successful for decades. Like he's been doing this a long time. Most of the people that see him are I've only been elk hunting for 3 years, so right. Why do I think that I would be able to go out there and have his experience and be able to execute? It doesn't matter how many times, it doesn't matter how many arrows I shoot on a daily basis. I could shoot, I could have the perfect practice and the perfect regimen and follow through with it and be doing it for the last 3 years. He's been doing it for 20 years, 30 years. Like he has that experience, and there's no substitute for experience and repetitions. And, that's another part of the world that we live in now, is that folks want instant gratification. They don't want to put the work in. We're not patient anymore. Right. And we don't look at things as, so switch from elk to, fitness again as the example. I mean, people come to me all the time with fitness goals and they're like, I want this and I want that and I want to do this. And, they're trying to build muscle and lose fat and build endurance all at the same time. And they're, eating, way fewer calories than their base metabolic rate. And they're like, why do I feel like dog poo? And why am I not making progress? And it's like, dude, we need to reevaluate all of this. And it starts with your relationship and thought process around what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, back to the thing with Ryan, when I look at Ryan, I've been fortunate. Around 2016 is when I really dove headfirst into the podcast and focused most of my energy on it full time. And since that time, I've been able to spend 100 days in the field, then up to as many as 200 days in the field on a few years, where I'm just out there hunting. 150 is an average, plus. So that is a lot of days out there hunting, when a lot of guys get to spend 10 days or 14 days. And even with an accelerated learning curve like myself for the last, 7 or 8 years of going to places like Kodiak Island in Alaska and New Zealand and experiencing hunts in Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, I've gained a lot of knowledge in that short period of time. I still, no matter how much I gain right now, and maybe I have some natural aptitude for it as well, still, Ryan Lampers has been doing this since he was like 10 in a way that most people didn't. Even though I grew up hunting, I didn't grow up hunting like Ryan did. And, it's uncanny what he can do, what I've witnessed him like kind of instinctively know. He's able to capitalize on opportunities that most people wouldn't. And it's almost second nature for him. I make mistakes. I still, to this day, despite a lot of experience now and being able to hunt with Ryan on a regular basis and being able to be mentored along the way, man, and I feel it in myself. I feel my own ability like exponentially growing, so that I too have some instinctive ability, like knowledge. I can predict what's going to happen. I'm really comfortable in the zone, getting close in a way I didn't used to. I don't second guess that much anymore. But yet, and still, Ryan is, when I'm with him, he'll be like, he just has that edge on everything where he rarely makes a mistake. And, I might make a mistake 20 out of 80, 2 out of 8 times. Ryan's almost 100, he bats 1,000. He just doesn't have that. And I think when it goes back to, hey, how do you become an expert? How do you become really good at something? They say 10,000 hours, kind of the foundation to become an expert. I look at how many hours I've spent podcasting, how many hours I've spent, producing film content and editing and filming in the outdoors, converting that into something that I put onto YouTube. The hours I've invested, the Brian now is not the same as Brian 5 years ago, both in hunting, but also in my ability to tell a story or produce a film. And all of that is because I put in the hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And there's, like you said, there's just no substitute for that.
No, you have to get in there and you have to do the thing. It's the man in the arena, right? Like you just have to get in the arena and things will happen. I'm sure that you've experienced this in your life where just by doing the things, just by showing up and being in the arena, you get opportunities, you get things that you can say yes to. And then that leads to more experience and it just snowballs. And so you have to throw yourself into whatever the thing is that you're passionate about and want to be doing. And, you mentioned the person that was the Brian that you are now is not the Brian that you were 5 years ago. I mean, as somebody who has podcasts out there that I did 5 years ago, I can't stand listening to a podcast I did 5 years ago. I'm sure you're the same way where if you hear one of those, you're like, God, that guy was horrible. But that's the point, right? Like you say, Lampers, maybe bats 1,000 now, but there was a time where he didn't, right? And his ability to, succeed the way he does now is because he went through all those learning experiences and some failures previously.
Now you mentioned,
and I think so many.
You mentioned earlier, real quick, when it comes to Ryan, there's a lot of people who want to do what Ryan does, and maybe there's a lot of people who want to do what I do in terms of what I do with Gritty. But they don't want to do. Most guys, they don't want to spend 100 days in the field. No showers, eating, food nothing fancy. There's no steaks and potatoes out there, And I think they want all the glory or the fun or the rewards that come from it. But when it comes down to paying the price for it, they don't want to. And I see it with filmmaking as well. Guys want to go out and film their hunts. Then they realize how many hours they have to sit behind a computer to produce a film or a film series. And they're like, life's too short. I don't want to do that. And I think that goes back to what you're saying earlier where, you need to start out with your plan, right? And if it's not like I wanted to spend those hours in the field, like that's not a challenge for me. I absolutely love it. But I've gone hunting with tons of buddies and they're like, I'm good with a couple of weeks a year. I don't want to do what you do. Same with the filming and the editing. They get behind a computer and they're like, yeah, I'm out. This isn't a passion I have. So I think often, understanding the cost of achieving a goal is critical on the outset, if it's possible, to realize that I'm willing to pay that, because otherwise, I do think people are just going to quit as soon as it gets a little hard, or like you said, I like that whole compete, compare, and copy. When someone has these toxic ideas on they see someone out there, they're like, I'm going to mimic him, but you don't really know what it takes to mimic him. That ship has sailed. I can't be Ryan. Like, I know that. I can only be Brian. The good news for me is I like Brian. I like, what I am. And that's something I think I'd like to hear your opinion on, because a lot of what I feel has attributed to my success is a level of contentment in my independence, contentment in who I am and what I can achieve. Like, I can't be Rich Froning, Matt Frazier. It's not where I can be, I should say I won't be Matt Frazier or Rich Froning, because I don't want to do what it takes to be that guy. What do you think?
There's something in the book, can't equals won't, right? And so this is in the book, and it's something that I had on the wall at the gym when I had House of Strength. And it's funny, I actually learned this lesson from John Carlton, who is a copywriter. And the way that he taught it to us is, I can't is the same thing as saying I won't. And so, we want to try to remove can't from our vocabulary. So, we made this a rule at the gym. And if anybody in the gym said I can't, everybody in the facility had to immediately stop what they were doing and perform 10 no-handed burpees. That's behavior modification therapy, right? So, the way that it's explained in the book is exactly what you just said. You have the tools, you have the same human body, you have the same information, you have most of the same access that a guy like Rich Froning or Matt Frazier has to achieve what they have achieved. And so do I. But neither of us is going to do that because we're not willing to do what they did to get there. And that's okay. And as a matter of fact, it's better to phrase it that way, because when we say I can't, what we're really doing is we're pawning off the responsibility, right? And I know you and I are both people that are big on accountability and ownership and responsibility, right? Go back to the very beginning of what we were talking about today with, basically it's taking responsibility for that gap, right? The gap is everything. The gap between this is where I am, this is where I want to be. This is where we are as an organization. This is where we want to be. If everybody takes accountability, or this is where we are as a nation, this is where we want to be, right? We all have to take accountability for closing that gap and be responsible for what is required to do that. And when we say I won't, we're admitting to ourselves and to other people that I'm not willing to do that. And that's fine. We actually need to do that because we're not going to do everything, right? Like you said, we're not going to be Ryan Lampers. We're not going to win the CrossFit Games. But I do like where you were going with that, because I feel like a big part of so self-confidence is something that comes up in a lot of the questions that I get, and people that read the book, and they want more discipline, they want more self-confidence. And when I speak, I have a slide that has this. It's an old magazine cover, and I think it's Life magazine. There's it's like a black and white picture. It's an old timey wheelbarrow, and this guy is walking across a gorge on a tightrope, pushing this wheelbarrow. And I don't know if it's Niagara Falls or it doesn't matter, but there's a bridge in the background, and the bridge is just loaded with people, and they're watching him. And so, the story goes, he makes it across the tightrope, and, everybody's, biting their nails and, all nervous. And he gets across, and he's like, all right, they cheer, they applaud. And he says, how many of you guys think I can, how many of you guys believe that I can make it back across? And they're like, oh yeah, like we all do. We just saw you do it, but we think you can do it again. He said, okay, who wants to get in the wheelbarrow and have me push you across? Well, nobody volunteers for that,
No.
right? And so the point is that there's a big difference in belief and trust, right? And the same way that we build self-confidence is the same way that we build trust. Basically, self-confidence is our ability to trust ourselves, right? And if you look at people that you know, or if this is you as you listen, if you're somebody who lacks self-confidence, most likely that lack of self-confidence stems from your past and your track record of letting yourself down, right? If you don't show up for other people, if you make promises to other people and you don't follow through on those promises, they're not going to trust you, right? It could be a person that you're in a relationship with. It could be a coworker. You know, if you're a business partner and you're constantly missing deadlines or not upholding your end of the ship, you're demonstrating to this other person that A, you can't lead yourself, B, you can't follow through on what you said. And so they're not going to trust you. Why would they trust you? Why would they follow you? And when we internalize that or flip that around and say, okay, well, if I make promises to myself, if I say, hey, you know, I'm starting my new diet on Monday, right? Well, by Wednesday, you're off of it. Or I'll start my workout program, or, you know, I'm going to write this book, or I'm going to record these podcasts, or whatever. Whatever these things are, we make these promises to ourselves, we commit to them. And then when we don't follow through, when we break that promise with ourselves, we're not giving ourselves a reason to trust or have confidence in ourselves, right? If anybody else treated you that way, you wouldn't trust them. You wouldn't follow them. So to me, it's never a mystery when somebody says, I don't have self-confidence. I lack discipline. Well, they're basically the same thing. When you're not following through with promises that you make to yourself, you're not going to have self-confidence. And so it starts with the littlest things. And that's why, you know, as you read through the book, there's so many things in the book that I just love voluntarily making ourselves as uncomfortable as possible. And if you can do these things and subject yourself to, you know, an ice bath, a cold shower, you know, go out in the middle of a busy coffee shop and just lay on the floor, right? Like don't obstruct traffic and, you know, mess up the flow, but, you know, do things that are outside of your comfort zone and do things that challenge you. And, you know, and they don't even have to be like grand, you know, challenges like that. It's, you know, as we said earlier, it's pack the meal, right? Make the food that you're supposed to make and take it to work and eat that.
Yeah. I have something I want to add. Two things you touched on. I really, one was, trust in yourself, right? Like developing, you know, that trust. And that brings to mind, Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life, where he says, treat yourself like someone you're responsible for taking care of. I've had this conversation with my daughter, and she's much more interested. She'll go out of her way to take care of someone else if she's responsible for, you know, let's say she's caring for an older person. She'll make sure they're taking their meds. She'll make sure they're getting their food. She'll make sure they're getting to bed on time. You know, she'll cover all these things because she's responsible for helping that person be successful. But to herself, she doesn't do those things. She knows what she should do, but she doesn't treat herself that way. It goes back to what you were saying, and when it comes to these, you know, these giving yourself these responsibilities and then executing on them helps build that confidence. And I think it's in the same vein. That's one of the things that I think is good for some people, because when they don't treat themselves well, and then they step outside themselves and they look at themselves as someone they're responsible for taking care of, they adopt sort of a different attitude. The other one was developing discipline, which kind of goes hand in hand with what you're saying here. You know, Jordan Peterson says, like, make your bed, or no, he says clean your room. Where it's like you said, it's not a super complicated big deal. It's just clean your room. Make sure your room is clean all day, every day. It's a really basic activity. You know, my brother struggled with some self-discipline, and somehow he got into the Wim Hof and the cold bath thing. And he got on this thing where he's like, no matter what, I am going to make myself get into this cold bath for 5 minutes, and then it was 10, and later 15 minutes. And it was a pond, actually, an ice cold pond down by the house. And he'd go in and strip down, and go into that pond every day. And it got to be, it wasn't so much about any like health benefits that were coming from it, although there were, I think, a lot of endorphins and things that were coming from it that felt good. But every day he wanted to not do it. Every time he had to get in there, he wanted to not do it. And every day he did it anyway. And by making himself do something he absolutely hated day after day after day, it instilled in him the ability to do other things he didn't want to do, because it was a lot. They were so much easier to do than the thing he made himself do every day. And that's where I think, discipline begets discipline.
No, you're absolutely right. And I mean, I don't think I've stopped nodding my head the whole time you're talking. I mean, it's when you can voluntarily subject yourself to that, especially, I mean, it doesn't have to be first thing in the morning, but if it is, what else is going to happen today that you're going to have to do that was more challenging than that, right? Like, what cold call do you have to make at business, or at your work, or, if you've got to sit down and, write a newsletter or edit a video, or, whatever it is, whatever the things are that we procrastinate and put off. Once you get used to, okay, this is the thing that I'm supposed to be doing right now. It doesn't matter how I feel. I'm going to do it. And you start to build that. It's neurological wiring, right? The phrase muscle memory is nails on a chalkboard to me. Muscles do not have the capacity for memory. So it's neurological wiring, right? But it extends beyond just physical movement. It's habit, right? That's all neurological wiring. So we're wiring into ourselves like, hey, this is how I respond. And you'll start to see that there is transfer in this to every area of life. And I'm sure you've seen it in hunting and in fitness. And I know you've talked about, lessons that you've learned from, one part of your life and how you can apply them to others. And man, it's so powerful and so simple. And, you brought up Jordan Peterson. He had there was a quote that he posted yesterday from, I think, his first appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast.
Yeah.
And I shared it on my story. I don't remember exactly how it went, but he's talking about like how they take your freedom. And he's saying, if I'm sophisticated in how I do it, I'm going to, just come a little bit until you just start to protest. And then I'm going to stop and I'm going to hold right there until you kind of get comfortable with that. And then I'm going to encroach a little bit more until you protest again. And I'm just going to repeat that cycle. And then in 3 years, you're going to look up and you're going to be like, how the hell did we get here? Right? It's the same thing with the corrosion of our self-confidence and our self-trust. Those little things where you say, all right, I'm going to let myself off the hook. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to let this one slip. I'm going to stay up a little bit later tonight, or I'm not going to, I'm going to have, it's the compromising of our values, both when we allow others to do it and when we do it to ourselves, that erodes and chips away at that little by little and by little. And then eventually you become a person that, when you look up and you're like, well, I don't have discipline. I don't have self-confidence. And it's because of those little micro decisions along the way.
That's crazy. Yeah. Speaking of that quote, I saw it and reminded me of when I was before I started Gritty, I was doing accounting, finance, and audits, Sarbanes-Oxley audits. And I was doing an audit for a corporation. It wasn't going to look good because it was going to be a qualified statement that basically said, yeah, we made this money, but it's not all that reliable, this number, because we have poor controls that actually, ensure that the foundation here that we're basing all these numbers on is accurate. Because, we had some security issues and we had this and we had that. And so as I, put the findings together and, was presenting it, the head honchos at the company were like, yeah, no, you're going to have to change these. And, this was sort of a newish, big, nice salary position that I had been given, I had earned, and here I am. And here's this moment where it's like, okay, and as I had been interviewing and doing the audits, I had been discovering from other people that a lot of the things I was finding had been there for a while. And they just sort of justified it or pushed it aside because of pressure from the powers above, right? And over time, they had sort of just kept letting things get worse and worse and kind of excusing it or justifying it or sweeping it under the rug. And I had been there, and I was presenting these findings saying, this isn't going to, here's your problems. And they're like, yeah, you're going to need to change that. And I'm like, no, I'm not. And so it went through this series of escalations where I met with this boss and then the boss above him and the boss above him. And there were these private meetings with veiled threats and, all this kind of stuff. And I was like, sure, email me everything you want me to modify. You just write it all down and I'll go through and make all those changes. Well, I knew they weren't going to write anything down. This was all,
right.
This is all just sort of, verbal and pressure and everything. And, but I thought about it, back to what you were saying with Jordan Peterson. He mentions this in the office. Something happens and it's wrong. And you decide you're just going to let it go. And then the next time they do something even more egregious and you're like, well, I kind of let it go before and you let it go. And they keep pushing you to the edge just before it's too much and you let it go until 2 or 3 years later, you find yourself in a horrible position because you didn't stand up on day one. And for me, I was like, okay, I'll lose my job. I'll lose this. I'll lose that, possibly. But I don't want to be here in 3 months or 6 months or a year while also giving up my standards and who knows what kind of hell I'll be living in then.
Right.
I'd rather just fight the battle now before the monster becomes bigger, before the dragon gets harder to slay. And most of the people at the office there, they were in so deep from years of ignoring things that they didn't feel like they could stand up anymore because they were part of the problem. They were part of what contributed to it. Now the higher ups are like, well, you get me in trouble, I get you in trouble. You're the one that signed this, last year. So for me, I was like, nah, I'll lose the job if I have to. And as it turned out, it went close. It came close, and in the end, actually, the 3 people above me, the 3 leaders of the company, all got fired and I kept my job. And it's interesting because I stood my ground and I thought I'd probably lose everything. And in the end, I actually won out. That is the sort of thing where if you can do that in your own life with most things, stand up for, what you believe in, where you're at. And that goes to, like what you said, I find it interesting how you phrase that, but even with setting your own goals for eating right, going to sleep on time and all that kind of stuff, it's in a way, you're right. You're betraying yourself. I never thought of it in those terms, but you're betraying yourself because you have what it takes to take yourself to a certain level. But every time you do that to yourself, you push yourself further and further and further until you're so far out there that you start saying, I can't, instead of I won't.
So the way I say it to people is I screwed up. I am not a screw up. Right. And so when someone starts to go down that path, as you just laid it out, then it becomes that inner dialogue becomes, I'm a screw up. I'm lazy. I don't have a work ethic, blah, blah, blah. And it becomes the narrative that repeats in our heads, in their heads. And it's so hard to break that inner dialogue, that narrative, the story that's in our head gets repeated more than we imagine. Think about how many times, so our hypothetical person that says, I don't have self-confidence or I don't have discipline. Think about how many times they've uttered that to another human. For every time that they've said it out loud, tape has played in their head dozens of times more than they've actually said it out loud. And so you start to believe that about yourself. You tell yourself that story of, I'm a screw up or I'm lazy. I don't have a work ethic. I'm a loser. I'm this. And so, that's being wired in, like that's that neurological wiring that we're talking about earlier. And so we really have to be careful. Language is extremely critical. I'm very particular about the words that I use. And when I coach people and we do coaching calls and I'll watch out for those things, and I'll teach people this stuff. And, it's NLP, basically at some level, right? Neuro-linguistic programming. And, you're doing this whether you realize it or not in your own head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if you're one of those people that you're sitting there and you're saying like, oh, I don't do that. Like, you're doing it subconsciously, and you're most likely doing it in a way that doesn't serve you, because it takes conscious thought and effort and awareness to do it in a way that does serve you. And if you're not bringing that awareness to it, you're probably doing yourself a disservice with negative self-talk and narrative.
You talk about this. I think you'd really like this book. Let me see here if it can. It's this Atomic Habits by James Clear, and it's a lot like yours. I recommend people read both yours and this book here. They're very you're saying all the same things. It's that behavioral kind of change. We live right now, Ryan, in a victim culture kind of postmodern world right now, where people are programming themselves to be victims and failures and to dismiss personal responsibility and accountability. It's toxic. It's everywhere. Everything you think. I often think it's like, okay, let's say half the things that are there to oppress you in the world, that are there to keep you down, let's say that they're all real. The solution is still the same. It's to overcome. It's to adapt and overcome. The whole, I just can't succeed because that's there and I'll never be able to do it doesn't make sense to me. It's like, let's say that someone really doesn't like me because of that I hunt. And so I'm going to be refused this opportunity and this opportunity and this opportunity, and YouTube's going to censor all my films and it's not going to plug it into the algorithms, and pretty soon they'll probably just ban me from the platform. It's like, all right, well, it's adapt and overcome. It's not, well, I guess I just got to quit, or it's just where I'm going to stay my whole life. I guess it doesn't make sense to me. Like, okay, so what? Things are hard. Mm-hmm. It sucks. You've got all these roadblocks. It's like, okay, the solution is the same, whether they're there or whether they're real or they're not real. It's still, you have to just overcome.
Yeah, you really do. And I mean, it's a mindset. I think this is maybe the second or third time since we've been talking today that this quote has popped into my head, and it's, how you do anything is how you do everything. Right. And it's just, there will always be excuses or reasons not to do something. There will always be obstacles. I mean, nothing's easy. Nothing, we'll use like eating right again as an example. I mean, you're not going to eat right by accident, right? Like, it's not, you don't just you don't just fall into, eating healthy, right? You have to make that a habit. You have to make that a practice. You have to put intention and effort into that. Same thing with, health or being successful in business or whatever the things are. And with that comes with anything that you want to try to achieve or accomplish in life comes any number of known and unknown obstacles. And I mean, if you quit when there's an obstacle in the way, you're never going to get there. So it's, to me, it's just, do you want the thing or not? And if you want it, then it's just, okay, like however many logs I have to climb over, however many creeks I have to cross, like whatever it is, like I'm going to go. And there's another quote that has served me well over the years. Enjoy when you can, endure when you must. And I think, that one, like I said, has served me very well over the years, because life is kind of, it ebbs and flows and it's cyclical. And there's times where, man, you're on cruise control and stuff is great. And then there's other times where like, you just got to grit and, endure and get through it, and it's, having that ability is priceless.
I think right now there's some interesting things going on around the globe, and I heard some commentary on the Ukraine-Russia thing going on right now, and some people said, I don't understand, why, for example, Russia would make the moves that they're making, because it's going to have a lot of heartache on both sides. It's going to cause a lot of damage. Why couldn't they just, be content with kind of just a relaxed modern life, kind of like what a lot of people have in the United States, and go out for wings with their friends on the weekends and go hunting a little bit, hit the gym. And it was brought up that, there are a lot of countries actually throughout history, especially in that hemisphere where Russia is, where what the government and what the powers that be have given people is hardship, struggle, trial, and they've created a lot of nationalism around that. In a sense, they've given people more purpose than just hedonism and enjoyment and relaxation. And it turns out that human beings there's some that want the relaxation, the hedonism, and the protection, but then there's those that are just in the DNA that they want hardship. They actually want to achieve something great as a nation, as a people, as a person. And so it's more like we actually need, as human beings, to feel proper in the world. We need to be challenged. And I think I'm preaching to the choir a lot with my audience, because my whole audience goes outside, suffers the elements, often backpacks their way in, kills an animal with a bow and arrow or whatever, cuts that thing, butchers it, hauls it off the mountain, brings it home, it does things the old-fashioned, the hard way. Part of that's just getting in touch, I think, with what it means to be human, and that humans need struggle. And this what the sort of lifestyle that we engage in is part of that. We're driven for it. Some people look at it from the outside that haven't lived it or aren't wired so much this way, and they're like, "Why you can go to the store and buy a steak? Why are you going to the mountains? Why any of this? We live in a modern world." And I think I go back to, there is something about my lifestyle and what I do that gives my body, mind, and health extreme, well-being. Like I have something that I think a lot of people in the modern world are lacking and don't know it. And there's a contentment in stuff that I feel, and a wholeness and a completeness, because I subject myself to misery hundreds of days a year. And a lot of people, they don't know what it's like to not shower on a regular basis. They don't know what it's like to even be cold all day, every day, for weeks and weeks on end. When I come home and I can get in a hot bath and, eat a pizza, it's like, whoa, like you really feel grateful for the world we live in today after, 14 days in the backcountry on freeze-dried food. It's like, especially when it's -10 for 5 of those 14 days, and you got a hole in your air pad, and you could barely keep the stove warm enough, and whatever it is, right? Those things, man, I don't think I'd have the perspective and the happiness that I have now if I didn't go through the suffering that I think the human soul needs. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I think it's wired into us. I mean, it is an inextricably linked, part of our DNA. I mean, if you think about, everybody sort of has a different number for how long they think humans have been on the earth, but whatever that number is for you as an individual, the portion of that time which we have had artificial light, artificial heating and cooling, the things that we enjoy, all those things that you said when you come back, you enjoy, right? We've had all of those things for maybe 200 years, some of them for 200, all of them for maybe 100, 120, freezers and refrigerators and indoor plumbing, not having to walk outside to go to the bathroom at night. Our modern lifestyle is at odds with our biology, right?
Amen.
Like that whole period of time prior to all of these modern conveniences, the human body evolved to deal with all those things. I read something, I saw a headline yesterday for a minimalist footwear company that I absolutely loved. And they said, the greatest piece of technology ever put into a shoe is the human foot. And I mean, that's so true. I mean, like, how are you going to improve on the human foot for what humans are meant to do? Right. So, the point here is, like I said, our modern lives are at odds with our biology. And that's, the light that we see, and we know how much blue light disrupts sleep. And the people like us who gravitate towards these expeditions, like you're talking about, making it hard, backpacking in, rising and sleeping with the sun. And, when you get tapped into that circadian rhythm and you're sleeping in the outdoors, there's no Wi-Fi out there, you're not worried about checking emails. And, especially when you're doing this in grizzly country, the shit that bothers you on a daily basis at home fades away in about 3 hours when you're out there, right? Like and it's great, but like, that's how we're biologically designed and wired. And that's, for 99.9% of the time that humans have been on this earth, that's been our life. So this whole, like, hey, we can run to Walmart and buy food, or, turn on the TV and be entertained and veg out and turn off our brains. I mean, that is so new to us. We are still, the human body doesn't evolve and adapt that quickly. I mean, we're only talking, 3, 4, maybe 5 generations since some of these things have been around. Our biology has not changed.
No, when you read like Daniel Boone or Kit Carson or, some of these early mountain men, right? And what they did as they came across, and then how many years even they just lived out there, explored things, and then came back to civilization. People in civilization were like, I don't understand what you're doing. Like, you're nuts. Like, why would you do that? And those men that went out there, they were in constant danger of being killed by, nature, by animals, by native people who lived here. Like, there's a serious threat, and yet that's where they wanted to live, on the edge of death all the time. And most of them did die by the time they were 35, 40 years old. And some of those rare ones lived longer, but they could have lived to 80 had they stayed, back in civilization, maybe, 70. But there's something about living versus existing. And I think that those men lived until the last. And I think it's a poor trade to just exist. And that's why I think, human beings need adventure. And this whole, this whole pandemic thing is disturbing in the sense that people are actually of the mindset of that safety is everything in life. Like, just staying alive and being safe is so important. And I'm like, dude, I go hike in grizzly country. I go 100 days in the backcountry in some below freezing temperatures. Like, these are things that I do. Safety is like, I'm trying to be as intelligent and smart as I can. I'm not taking any, foolish risks. But at the same time, safety is not my concern. Life is my concern. Living is my concern. Adventure is my concern. Well-being, like experience, is my concern. It's not hiding and being safe. And we have a problem right now in the West where we are just soft and people just want to be safe. They'll give up all their whole life for safety. Makes no sense to me.
No, I'm a huge fan of the book Anti-Fragile. Have you read that?
No, I'm going to write that one down. Anti-Fragile.
Okay. It's Nassim Taleb. I always say it incorrectly. Nicholas. It's one book in a series. The series is Incierto, and I guess it's the Latin word for uncertainty. And there's several other books in that series that he has written. He's one of the smartest dudes that you'll ever read. Like, when I listen to books on Audible, I'm usually 1.5 to 2x speed. Yeah. I have to slow his down to 1x, and I'm like, wait, what is he saying? But it's a phenomenal book, and so the premise of the Anti-Fragile is, even the subtitle is Systems That Gain from Disorder, right? And so the premise is that something that is merely resilient only remains through a turbulent circumstance, right? Like, so a lighthouse, right? Like, you have a storm comes, the storm passes, the lighthouse remains, but it doesn't improve. So it's merely resilient. So you have fragile, you have resilient, and then you have anti-fragile. And something that is anti-fragile actually gains from that disorder. And so early on in the book, he starts to look at it through an evolutionary and a natural perspective. And so when you see in nature any organism, and you classify them in those three types, those three kind of hierarchies of, fragile, resilient, and then anti-fragile, the organisms that refuse to go extinct are often the ones that are anti-fragile, actually kind of have to be anti-fragile in order to continue to evolve and adapt and continue to remain. And so it's a fascinating book. I mean, it's, it'll explore kind of economics and, mindset, and I think you would really, really love it. He's got a couple other books too that are all really good. Black Swan is one that talks about unforeseen events. So anyway, nice. As you were talking through that book popped into my head because, this thought process of trying to be anti-fragile, right? To, we never know. So with the Black Swan event, like, that's the worst case scenario that has ever happened is always worse than the previous worst case scenario. Mm-hmm. Right. So if we prepare for whatever the worst thing is that has happened up to this point, we will still be unprepared for the next worst case scenario.
Gotcha.
So that's part of Black Swan and part of that series in the book. But if we're trying to adopt that mindset of being anti-fragile, how do I move past this desire for safety and certainty, right? Like, you're talking about people want to be safe, and so many people want certainty. And the argument to be made here is that the most anti-fragile move that we can make is to expose ourselves to these things, to prepare ourselves, to be brave and to develop the widest array of skills and assets so that we can be prepared for the widest variety of possible circumstances that we might face as an individual and as an organism.
Yeah. No, I like it. I think that's a great way to get through life, when I was in college and I was studying accounting and finance, I had all these family members going, look, you're more creative, and why would you want to go into that field and do any of that stuff? And I was like, because I really suck at these things. Like, this is not a natural skill set for me. And I purposely went through college doing pretty much work that was really counter to my nature and my personality. And then I went into a career field that was similar, but I still put in the discipline to become high functioning in that space. There's parts of running a business and doing what I do that are completely counter to my nature. Like, but it was the years of the schooling and the forcing myself to do the things that I really didn't have a drive to do naturally, that I think rounded me out and allowed the Brian today to be successful at what I do. I'm just good enough at those weak spots that I have that I can make this thing go. But if I had only gone down the road of what I was naturally gifted at and kind of went down that road and never really, I always say, like, I'm not that impressed by people who execute on things they want to execute on. Like when I see somebody do something awesome and they're like, but they don't, it's not like hard. They want to, like, they're internally, they want to do it. I'm like, okay, great. I'm impressed by the person who executes well on the things they hate doing. Like, that to me is like it's not, because I know myself, it's not that hard for me to go and get the motivation to go do what I want. Okay, I want to go to a hunt in Alaska. That's not a real big, like, I want to do that. And right. It's actually easy to execute it because it's in my whole being. Sitting behind the desk and editing a movie for 3 weeks, that is not what I want to be doing. I want to be outside, and so I'm very impressed with people who are able to do what they don't like to do, not the people who do what they're already motivated to go do, So,
well, and I think that comes full circle with what we were saying earlier about taking responsibility for that gap, right? If this is where I am, this is what I want to accomplish, and these are the things that need to be done, in order to, like, take you, for example, be successful at, hunting and making those hunts into films and having them be viewed and seen by enough people to be able to create a business and monetize this thing and be able to, pay the staff and everybody have a livelihood out of that. And that means, I have young people in business ask me all the time. They're like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. And I'm like, dude, when I started my gym, you think I wanted to clean toilets? Like, that's not what I started a gym for, but it's got to get done.
Yeah.
Like you just got to, like,
that's perfect example.
That's perfect. There's no job out there where every single aspect of it is something that you want to do. So get that notion through your head, and you're going to have to suck it up and do what is required.
Yeah. So, before we wrap this thing up, I want to, I know this is going to be a little challenging, but let's say a guy is out there listening to this podcast. He's been stuck in a rut. He's not as fit as he wants to be. He's not accomplishing, the life that he wants to accomplish. Tell me, like, what are like the top 5 things he can do? Where would you begin in order to get on the right path? Some tactical, practical steps to make some changes right away.
This is going to sound this is definitely something that people have not heard before, probably, unless they've read the book, actually. But I would actually start with defining your values as an individual. I go speak to organizations, companies all the time, and that everybody can recite the corporate values, and they're on the wall and they know them. And then I'm like, okay, well, raise your hand if you know what your values are as an individual. And very few people have that answer. And as we've talked about, most of this conversation is about aligning our actions and our choices with those values. And you can't do that if you haven't first defined what those values are. Who are you? How do you want to move through the world? What do you stand for? What do you stand against? And once you have that, I know that kind of sounds a little woo-woo, but man, when you know what those things are, it serves as it's a scaffolding of sorts for a decision-making matrix. And, you can use it as a filter to, you wake up in the morning and you look at those 3 words and you're like, okay, how do I demonstrate, or how am I going to demonstrate A, B, and C today? And then at the end of every day, you check back in with it. Did I demonstrate A, B, and C? And I promise you, if you start answering that with a yes every morning and every night, you're going to start to move through the world as the version of yourself that you want to be. When you get to that micro decision point in the middle of the day, and, it's, do I do this? Do I do the thing that I'm supposed to do? And then you check back in with those values. You're just like, man, I'm going to do the thing that is aligned with my values. And the reason that this is so important, we go back to the book. I mean, the title is F Your Feelings. Feelings are fleeting, transient, short-term ways of being. The way that you feel right now is not the way that you're going to feel in 30 minutes or 3 hours or 3 days. But your values aren't going to change. And if you can get to a point where you make decisions based on your values, you will become what we talk about as a state independent performer, right? Like everybody wants to be Michael Jordan in the flu game, right? That is a state independent performance.
Yeah.
Right.
Very good point.
So you want to be a high performer? Figure out what your damn values are and start acting in accordance with those values. That would be step 1.
Okay, wait.
So
say that again. Phrase that again. I want to hear it again about the Michael Jordan state. Explain that in more detail.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So, in the book, we talk about states and traits, right? States, think of a state as like, the other analogy here is climate versus weather, right? There's always weather, right? And it's ever changing, right? The weather right now is different than the weather, later today. It could be different than the weather tomorrow. If you're, on a backpacking hunt, you're going to be checking in, like, what's the weather, right? But if you zoom out, the general climate of where you're going to go, right? Like you kind of know the climate of Alaska or Arizona or Montana in September versus Montana in November, right? Like you kind of have a general idea, right? So climate is more akin to a trait, right? And those are things that are, built over time because of a consistency in either weather or state. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so, as we said a minute ago, feelings are defined by neuroscience as mental experiences of physiological states. Mental experiences of physiological states. So physiological just means bodily. So whatever's happening from your neck down is affecting, what's going on between your ears. And we can prove this by saying, hey, put 30 seconds on the clock and do as many burpees as you can in 30 seconds. Your physiology will change and your mental state will be different in 30 seconds. Right? You've all seen the meme of, you're one workout away from a better mood, right? Like that's why, right? And so, this whole concept of being a high performer and being somebody who gets results regardless of how you feel, it requires us to be a state independent individual, right? Meaning that independent of whatever state I'm in, you can count on me to show up and do whatever it is that I'm supposed to show up and do. Right. And so the example is, the Michael Jordan, the flu game, right? Like it's a little bit different, but I mean, he had the flu. That's a state. It's a short-term transient passing way of, being. And he showed up, right? And he showed out and we all remember it. What if he had just been, what if he pulled a Scottie Pippen and was like, yeah, I'm not really feeling it. I'm going to sit on the bench. You guys do your thing.
Then he'd be Scottie Pippen, not Michael Jordan.
That's why everybody wants to be MJ.
Because I think about what you're talking about with a state independent performance. That's how most 10 or 14-day hunts go. Like, often when Lampers and I tag out on the last day, which seems to be our MO, we get out there and, even let's say mule deer in Arizona or late season, whatever it is, elk hunting with the bow. It's like you're out there and you're tired. You're hungry. You have no energy left. I'm breaking out with cold sores. I'm dehydrated. I'm sunburnt, or freezing to death. I'm losing weight. I ran out of food for 3 days on a hunt we did a year ago. Literally, I had no food for 3 days. I just didn't eat for 3 days. On the third day, Ryan coughed up a little bit of oatmeal because Ryan doesn't share. If you don't bring enough food, you're just out. And I wasn't going to quit and go home. So I was curious, well, how long can the human body go without food and still get it done? Well, I went 3 days and I was fine. You're not going to die. You get water. It's amazing what the body and the mind can do when you just commit to it. And that was a state independent performance. I did not feel on those days like I felt on the first 5 days of the trip. But it didn't really matter. The job needed to be done and the goal needed to be met. And so you execute anyway, and you just mentally check out like, okay, you just don't entertain that fact that you're hungry. You don't entertain the fact that you need sleep. You just focus on the goal and you execute on the goal. So I guess, I really like how that's phrased, a state independent performance. How you feel really isn't the issue. The issue is performance. Of course, you can only take that so far, right? I mean, you can die,
right?
Right. So
yeah, I mean, we're not saying intentionally create the worst possible scenario. But how likely is it that when you are called upon to perform, that all of the variables are in your favor? Right. And so, for example, we just had a post recently, about tips for practicing archery, right? How many people, when they're practicing shooting their bow, are doing it on a sunny day, low wind, it's flat, all the conditions are perfect? Dude, when is that ever how you shot an elk? Right.
Right.
So, make it as challenging as possible, shoot over a limb or under a limb and, on a hill and on a windy day and, hold your hands in a bucket of ice for, 2 minutes before you shoot. So you get used to cold fingers and, all these things that are going to replicate the real situation.
I like to sprint and then do 20 burpees as fast as I can, then stand up and then shoot. And one thing I've learned is there's a difference between adrenaline and an increased heart rate. Mm-hmm. They don't exactly mimic each other. With adrenaline, you lose fine motor skills often. Like I can't get the release hooked onto the string, but
it's like I'd always have it on there first.
Those details are completely fine. I just am heaving and breathing and stuff and fatigued, but it's different than adrenaline. And when you combine the two, good luck. But a lot of people be like, I miss every time I choke. It's because the adrenaline piece of it, and so practicing
I notice it with my
key.
Vision. Yep. I notice it with my vision. Actually more on a rifle than on a bow. I have a hard time, if my adrenaline really gets going, I have a hard time acquiring the target in the scope.
Yeah. And so that's just it. Practice in those trying conditions, and that can dramatically change everything. So back to establishing values. When your value is, to succeed on a hunt, to go out there, my values are kind of like, this is just a moment in time. The suffering is just these 5 days, right? This will pass. In 3 days, I'll be in a warm, dry place, let's say. I can tell myself my values are over here, so the state and the way that I feel is irrelevant at the moment. It's subordinate, I guess, to my values, which are over here, and then I execute based on my values, not
right. And so once we have our values, then we use them as a filter, as a question. And so, a lot of times when I'm working with people, I'll pull some random words out. People use things like courageous. I actually have a guy right now who just chose grit. There's leader, honor, integrity, whatever the words are that resonate with you. And so the way that I walk people through that exercise is just, some of those questions I phrased earlier. Who are you? How do you move? How do you want to be remembered? How do you want to move through the world? And just brainstorm. Don't censor. Write down, 5 or 10 words and come back a day or two later and look for the 3 that really jump out at you the most. And then maybe pick those 3. I like 3 because it's easy to remember. Once it gets into 4 and 5, then you have a hard time remembering all of them. And if you can't remember them, then they're not going to do you any good. So, but let's say grit is the value, right? And so, you wake up in the morning and, you've got a hole in your air pad and you haven't eaten in 2 days and, it's cold and you don't want to get out of the tent. And you're like, okay, I'm just going to sleep in today. I'm not going to get out of the tent. And then you ask yourself that question, well, how am I demonstrating grit today? Well, now we know you got to get out of the tent.
Right.
Because by staying in the tent, you're not demonstrating grit. Right. And so when you look at this scenario, whatever it might be, through the lens of your values, the right choice becomes very clear.
Yeah. It's interesting. You mentioned this whole human performance thing has always fascinated me, as we all try to achieve greater levels of, I guess, mastery of ourselves. When I interviewed Cameron Haynes years ago, and he was describing a hunt he was on, or a run he was on, the Boston Marathon, and he was running with Lance Armstrong, and how he ran faster the second half of the Boston Marathon than he did the first half of the Boston Marathon. And only a couple of people had ever done that in the history of the marathon. And one of the things that he did was, when he was pacing with Lance, he thought at halfway through, he thought, I can't go any further. I can't even, it's impossible. It's over. Like, I'm hitting this wall. Can't be done. But then he just was like, I'm just going to pace. This is Lance Armstrong. Like, I'll die first. I'm going to stick it out. I'm going to pace with him, and, we'll see what happens next. And then the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. And then he finished it. He thought it was impossible halfway through, and yet he still finished the other half of the marathon even faster than he did the first half. And he realized that what his head and mind and body were telling him wasn't reality, because he in fact did do what he thought couldn't be done. And I think that's a lesson for all of us, that we're a lot tougher and a lot stronger than we think we are. One of the things that I do is, when I go to the CrossFit gym up the road here from the house, often I work by myself, but work out alone at home, but it's freezing here. It's been cold. So I've been going to this gym near the house. And when I get there, it's so interesting, because the workout could be 30 or 40 minutes. I mean, just a long, chipper or grueling, just kind of thing, or just intense in some way. And it's never a question from the moment I pick up the barbell or do the workout. There's not a moment where I'm like, can I finish this? Like, it's a given. There's just not another choice. It's like, it's the workout. This is, and then I just do it. And sometimes, I see, like, we're doing burpees, and they're endless, just burpee after burpee. And I see these people stop and rest, or let's say you have the bar in your hand, same principle. And it's like, it's 12 presses in a row and guys do 3 or 4 and they drop the bar, and then they pick it up and they do 3 or 4 and they drop the bar. And I'm like, no, don't drop the bar. Just do it. It hurts. It hurts so bad, and it's so tough. And it's like, I just execute cleanly best I can, but I refuse to drop the bar. And I feel like that there's very few people that I'm with in the gym that are doing it, that have that kind of mental discipline to just push through it, even though it hurts. And at the end of the day, it kind of is like what Cameron Hanes said. It just hurts. It's not actually something I can't do, But too many times people give in to the discomfort, and instead of, rising to that moment. And I think those little micro moments in my life over the course of many, many years has built that sort of resilience to where, I just execute, do it. When it hurts, I don't stop, And I think that's, I don't know, it's, for me, that's worked well. It starts with like a cold bath every morning, or just cleaning your room, whatever that little goal is.
Yep. It's all those little micro decisions. And I mean, I know it sounds so simple and so almost meaningless, but those are the things, man. Those are the things that make the difference. And so if we go all the way back, I mean, we kind of went off on a tangent because you asked me maybe like 5 things for a dude that, so I think, starting with values would be one. And then the very next, like, I guess number 2, the next thing would be to go through, as we've kind of just talked about, and audit your actions and your decisions. And maybe, it's almost as if you were going to keep a food log, keep a journal, or a log of your activities for a week, and see, are you choosing to watch 3 hours of TV at night instead of meal prep and get your workout and, go to bed, and, really just like doing a real objective audit of how you spend your time. And then you may be able to see, okay, well, I didn't think I had time to get this in and get this in, but now I realize, I'm wasting time here, or, I'm spending a lot of time playing video games that I could be doing, whatever else it is. One of the best pieces of advice I was ever given your life is perfectly designed for the results that you are currently getting. So if you're getting results that you don't like, you're going to have to change some of the things that you're doing. So, auditing and figuring out where those, big changes are will give you insight into, where you can kind of apply pressure and make some changes that will have big impact. So that would be steps 1 and 2.
I would, let me throw in there a comment on that. One of the ways that I left the old job and did gritty was I read The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, and I basically audited what I did at the office day after day, using what he taught me in the book, and then realizing, wow, there's a lot of room for improvement, and then fixing that, and then getting done basically in 20 hours or 15 hours what I was getting done in 40 hours before. It took months to achieve that level of efficiency, but that's in essence what I did. I audited everything, was like, okay, where are the problems? Backfilled those. And then pretty soon I was working from home 2 days a week, maybe 10 hours Monday, Tuesday. And then I had Wednesday, Thursday, Friday all to myself, and the weekend to do other things like film hunts and edit and podcast. And I had 2 jobs at the same time, but it was the audit and then really looking at where everything was broken and then fixing it.
And that's such a good move to take that approach of, I don't have to quit one and then start the other one from zero, right? Let's, like you said, figure out, okay, I can still do everything I was doing. And then while I'm doing that, I'm going to start to build my other one. So you taper out of one as you build the other. I think if more folks thought about the transition that way, instead of being so binary, like I've got to flip a light switch off here and then flip this one on, and I've got to try to get this one on before these lights go out, like that's never going to work. Right. To think about it that way and phase in and build it, I think more people would be able to make that transition.
That's a great place to start. You got anything else to throw out there real quick?
No, I'd say, it's tough in a hypothetical without knowing more of the details. So I think if the individual does that self-audit and then, check in with your values, and then you've got to make that decision that you're the only one who is responsible for closing that gap. And, you have to honestly answer that question of, are you committed to that? Are you ready to do that and everything that it entails?
It's interesting when you talk about the values too. It's kind of what I did recently with my family, and my daughters all in homeschool now. I was thinking, what are the things that matter to me most in life? What are the things that I value above all else? And all the success that I could achieve with Gritty or with the podcast or helping people win at life or trying to just impart what little wisdom I've gained to other people, that all meant so little to me if I couldn't also bring my own 3 children ahead as well. Like if I lost them in the process of doing everything else, a lot of what I feel like I did in life would be meaningless to me. And understanding that that's how I see the world and how I value it changed, where I'm spending my time and how I'm spending it. And yet I'm more aligned than ever with what I value the most. And so there's a lot more time at home now than there was a year ago or 3 years ago. And my kids are no longer in public school. They're in homeschool, and they're getting curriculum from their mother and from me. And I'm seeing also the joyous benefits that are coming from realigning those values, like identifying those values rather, and then just sticking to those. Then it's really easy to decide, okay, am I going to go on this hunt trip that's going to be 3 weeks long, and then come back for 2 days and then be gone for another 3 weeks for this other trip because I really want to get this content and this experience. And it's like, no, because when I do the math, it doesn't pencil out with my values. My daughters need a dad at home. They need someone to be around. And so it's been easy, and it's like, okay, well, what's the solution then instead? Well, Brad Hunt and Lampers are going to go, and I'm going to stay home. And then I'm going to be home for this period, and then I'll go do this other one at this time. And we'll find a way to get the adventures recorded and to get the knowledge gained from each trip and impart it to the audience. But at the same time, I'm aligning it with the other parts of values and finding that balance. And it's all about identifying the values first and then using that as a filter. I didn't even think of it in those terms, but that's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like it. I mean, it sounds like it's led you to kind of the sweet spot with, family and, with your work and all your passions, and, you get to do everything that you love and want to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been pretty sweet. I've really enjoyed this conversation. And we should do it again. I'd love to do a face-to-face at some point. This whole Skype Zoom over the internet thing is a challenge, but we're doing our best.
Yeah. No, I've enjoyed it as well. And I would love to be able to do it face-to-face, maybe on a mountain somewhere.
Absolutely. So, okay, Ryan, guys that are listening, they want to get in touch with you. They want to get more information from you. I can't recommend your book enough. I have it on Audible. And you do a great read, and I've listened to it a couple of times on some long trips, taking notes up in the mountains, things that I find interesting that you say. I do that with a lot of different authors, but I really enjoyed. I am a skeptic, bad skeptic, and when people reach out to me and I haven't heard of them or I don't know them, I kind of am like, okay, I'll give your product a try. Like maybe it's trekking poles from Peaks, or maybe it's even Mountain Ops supplement, or maybe it's it's your book, and I'm just like, okay, I'll whatever. And then I always give it a chance, even though I complain, and then then there's those times where I feel like, wow, I'm impressed. This really hit the mark for me. And your book is right there in that category. So kudos to you, and I recommend everyone go out and get the book. Like I said, I've got it on Audible. I think that's an efficient way to consume it, and you read it well, opposed to some audiobooks that are torture. So check that out. And then where else can they get a hold of you? What else do you have going on?
Oh man. Well, first of all, I appreciate everything you said about the book. I mean, that means a tremendous amount to me. And I'm laughing because I have a lot of people reach out to me with, stuff as well. I don't have nearly the size of a following that you do, so I'm sure you get more of it, but I appreciate you giving it a chance. As far as reaching out to me, man, I guess Instagram would be the best. It's at Ryan Munsey _. My website is ryanmunsey.com. Like you said, for the book, I think Audible is a great way to check that out. We do have something else we haven't even gotten to talk about yet. As we did kind of mention, I am into backcountry hunting as well. And since, as you can tell by this conversation, I refuse to compromise any values, my hunting partner, who's now turned business partner, Mike, and I have been making our own meals, and we decided to turn it into a business. And so we have one freeze drying machine, and we're slowly going to be scaling this thing up. But the company is called Fuel the Pursuit, and our goal is to make the best tasting and best functioning freeze-dried backpacking meals that the world has ever seen. So
I'm seeing it right here on the
yeah, that's it.
Fuel the Pursuit.
Yep.
There's the
Fuel
Instagram.
The Pursuit. Yep.
Nice.
I need to get my hands meals this week, and
I need to get my hands on some of these.
We'll make sure you get some. Hey, Hunter was supposed to share some with you. If he didn't share, then I'll have to have a conversation with Hunter.
He might have brought him to Arizona, but he did. But we were eating out of a camp. We didn't backpack, so we'll have to get a. Do you have any?
We'll make sure you get to try some.
Yeah, I'd love to try that out. So, how's that business going for you?
Yeah. Well, it's very early on. Last year, it took us a lot longer than we expected last year to get health department approval. And our hope was that we would get it in time to get the meals out before hunting season. But we didn't get the okay until September. And by that point, we were already out hunting. So we did our first drop. Actually, this week, we've got about 100 meals left today as we're recording this, but expect that to be gone. And, because we're scaling up and we only have the one machine, we'll be doing like limited edition drops of, a couple hundred maybe meals at a time. We'll try to get one more out before May so that folks can have them for spring bear if possible. But it's been a really interesting learning experience, and it's been fun to share the meals. I think with the exception of Hunter, everybody who's tried them has absolutely loved them so far. I think he liked them, but he didn't give them a 10 out of 10 like everybody else. So I will be curious to hear your thoughts, and please give us honest feedback. I mean, we want these things to be as great as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always out there looking for stuff, and you also have the Better Human Project podcast as well. That's
correct. Yes. Yep.
And
Better Human Project, and we're actually didn't do so well last year with getting episodes out. I kind of took some time off, but we're gonna come back this year, and we'll have quite a few more episodes this year.
Good. I was the same way. I produced 50% fewer episodes last year than I've ever produced. And I just ended up needing to take that break, kind of circled the wagons around the family, and I got a little sick at the same time with COVID and the whole deal. So I'm with you on that, but I feel like we're cranking now. We're running on all cylinders, and it's going to be a good year. So people can check out, basically, if they just get to Ryan Munsey on the Instagram, all the links are there. And it's Ryan R.
Yeah, I think you can find everything else.
MUNSEY _ So
that's correct.
All right, man. Thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate this very much.
Yeah,
and we'll stay in touch. Folks, thanks for tuning in to the podcast, and give Ryan a follow. Thanks for all the support, and stay gritty.